My name is Winifred, and at 32 years old, I thought I had everything figured out. Right now, I'm packing the last of my belongings while my husband Mark sleeps in our bed with my younger sister Brittany. My parents know about it, and they chose their side this morning. They want me gone, and I'm leaving without a fight. But before I walked into this house for the last time, I stopped by my law office and signed one document that's going to change everything. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever been betrayed by family, hit that subscribe button, and let's walk through this journey together. 6 months ago, my life looked like something out of a magazine spread. Mark and I had been married for 8 years together since high school, when he was the star quarterback, and I was the valedictorian everyone said was too serious. We lived in a beautiful colonial house in Westport, Connecticut, complete with the white picket fence and the 2-car garage. I was a senior associate at Sterling & Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the state, working 70-hour weeks toward a partnership that was finally within reach. My younger sister Brittany was 28, an artist who painted abstract pieces in a converted garage studio downtown. She had this wild, free spirit that everyone adored, especially our parents. Where I was the responsible one who got straight A's and never missed curfew, Brittany was the creative soul who could charm her way out of any situation. Our mother would always say, "Brittany got the heart, while I got the brain," as if having both was impossible. The comparison started young and never really stopped. At family dinners, Mom would showcase Brittany's latest painting while asking me if I really needed to check my work phone at the table. Dad would nod along, never quite taking sides, but never defending me either. When Brittany dropped out of college to pursue her art, they called her brave. When I made law review, they asked if I was sure I wanted such a demanding career. But I thought we were close despite everything. Brittany would crash at our house whenever she fought with her boyfriend, and I'd make her chocolate chip pancakes in the morning while she told me about her latest creative breakthrough. She'd tease me about my power suits, and I'd mock her paint-splattered jeans, but it felt like love. It felt like sisterhood. The changes started small, so small, I didn't even notice them as changes. Mark began complaining about my hours, which wasn't new, but the edge in his voice was sharper. Instead of pride when I told him about winning a motion or landing a new client, I got sighs and comments about empty dinner tables. He started going to the gym religiously, dropping 20 pounds, and buying new clothes that Brittany helped him pick out because apparently I had no fashion sense beyond courtroom attire. Then Brittany broke up with Connor, her boyfriend of 3 years. She called me crying at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, and of course I told her to come stay with us. Mark was surprisingly enthusiastic about the idea. He set up the guest room himself, even bought new sheets, and those fancy pillows from the store I'd been wanting to check out but never had time for. I remember feeling grateful that my husband was being so supportive of my family. The guest room arrangement was supposed to be temporary, just a few weeks while Brittany found a new apartment. But weeks turned into months, and somehow it felt natural having her there. She and Mark would cook dinner together on the nights I worked late, which was most nights. They started this tradition of Monday movie nights, building elaborate blanket forts in the living room like kids. I'd come home to find them laughing over popcorn and wine, and Brittany would always pause the movie to catch me up on what I'd missed. They developed inside jokes I didn't understand. References to TV shows they binged while I was at the office, shared opinions about music I'd never heard. Brittany joined Mark's gym, and they became workout partners, meeting at 5 a.m. before his work and her studio time. She'd post selfies of them flexing in mirrors with hashtags about gains and sweat equity, and our mother would comment hearts and fire emojis saying how wonderful it was that they got along so well. I was working the Miller Industries merger, the biggest case of my career. $2 billion, hundreds of jobs, and a patent dispute that could reshape the entire tech industry. I was the only one at the firm who understood the technical details well enough to spot the discrepancies in their filing. Richard Sterling himself had pulled me aside and essentially promised me a partnership if I could deliver this win. 3 months, he said. 3 months until the announcement that would make me the youngest partner in firm history. So when Mark's complaints got louder, I promised him it was temporary. When I missed our anniversary dinner because of an emergency filing, I swore I'd make it up to him. When Brittany offered to keep him company at the charity gala, I couldn't attend. I thanked her for being such a good sister. I was too focused on the brass ring to see what was happening in my own home. The signs were everywhere if I'd been looking. Mark's phone was suddenly always face down on the counter. He'd take calls in the garage claiming it was work, but laughing too much for anything professional. Brittany started doing her laundry at odd hours, and I'd find her things mixed in with ours, her lacy underwear tangled with Mark's gym shorts. She bought new perfume, expensive stuff that filled the house with jasmine and vanilla. Mark started using a different cologne too, something Brittany picked out that supposedly suited him better. There were late-night conversations I could hear through the walls, but couldn't quite make out. The way they'd spring apart when I entered a room, not guilty exactly, but aware. How Brittany suddenly became interested in football, Mark's passion that had bored her senseless for years. The way Mark knew exactly how she liked her coffee down to the specific brand of oat milk and the half teaspoon of agave nectar. My mother started making comments about how thin I looked, how tired, how maybe I should consider whether the partnership was worth sacrificing my marriage. She'd gesture at Brittany glowing and relaxed in her artistic pursuits, and wonder aloud if success was really worth it if you had no one to share it with. But I had someone I'd argue. I had Mark. Mom would just purse her lips and change the subject. The Thursday that changed everything started with a migraine. I'd been staring at documents since 4 a.m. trying to find a loophole in Donovan Corp's counterfiling. The letters started blurring together, and my assistant finally insisted I go home when she found me with my head on my desk, unable to look at the light. It was 2 p.m., the earliest I'd left the office in months. I stopped at the pharmacy for migraine medication and on impulse bought a bottle of Mark's favorite wine. Maybe we could have an early dinner, I thought. Maybe Brittany would be at her studio and we could reconnect like we used to. I even texted him that I was coming home, but he didn't respond. Not unusual, he often left his phone in his locker during gym sessions. Both cars were in the driveway when I pulled up. Mark's BMW and Brittany's beat-up Honda that she'd painted with flowers one summer when we were in college. They must have finished their workout early, I thought. Maybe they were having lunch. I used my key quietly, not wanting to startle anyone already composing an apology for invading their friend time. The house was quiet except for sounds from upstairs. Rhythmic sounds that my brain tried to categorize as exercise. Maybe they were doing those partner workouts Brittany had been posting about. But there was laughter too breathy and intimate, and my sister's voice saying Mark's name in a way that made my stomach clench. I climbed the stairs on autopilot, my body moving while my mind tried to rationalize what I was hearing. The bedroom door was open just a crack. Our bedroom with the California king bed we'd picked out together and the duvet cover I'd ordered from Italy for our 5th anniversary. I could see movement through the gap flesh and tangled limbs, my sister's distinctive tattoo of a hummingbird on her ribcage. The wedding photo on my nightstand was turned face down. I pushed the door open fully and time seemed to crystallize. Mark was on top of her, his back muscles that I once loved to trace now tensed in passion for someone else. Brittany's legs were wrapped around him, and she was wearing the red lingerie set Mark had given me last Valentine's Day, the one I'd been saving for a special occasion that never seemed to come. Her eyes met mine over his shoulder, and for a moment I saw no surprise there. Only a flash of something that looked almost like triumph. Mark scrambled off her so fast, he nearly fell off the bed, grabbing for sheets that were tangled at their feet. His face was red sweat on his forehead, and he was already stammering excuses before his feet hit the floor. "It's not what it looks like." He actually said that like we were in some bad movie. Like I hadn't just seen exactly what it looked like. Brittany didn't scramble. She sat up slowly, making no effort to cover herself, my lingerie still perfectly in place like she'd dressed for this moment. She tilted her head at me with this little smile and said the words that still echo in my nightmares. "Actually, Winnie, it's exactly what it looks like." The calm that descended on me was strange, almost otherworldly. My hands didn't shake as I pulled out my phone and started taking photos. Mark lunged for it, but I stepped back, continuing to document the scene. The tangle of their clothes on my reading chair. Brittany's earrings on Mark's nightstand. The 2 wine glasses on my dresser, the bottle already half empty at 2 in the afternoon. Mark found his boxers and pulled them on, running his hands through his hair the way he did when he was nervous in law school back when I used to help him study for exams he could barely pass. "Winnie, please let me explain," he kept saying, but Brittany put her hand on his arm to stop him. "We're in love," she announced, like she was telling me about the weather. "It's been 4 months. We didn't plan for it to happen, but you're never here anyway, and Mark needed someone who could actually be present in his life. Someone who prioritizes love over billable hours. 4 months. I did the math quickly. That meant it started when I was working through our anniversary weekend on the Patterson case. The weekend Mark had said he understood that we could celebrate later, that my career was important to him too. The weekend Brittany had offered to keep him company so he wouldn't be alone. I found my voice surprisingly steady. How many times in my bed Mark flinched, but Brittany answered, "Does it matter? You haven't been present in this marriage for years. We just filled the space you left empty." I looked at Mark, then really looked at him. This man I'd loved since I was 17, who'd proposed to me at our college graduation, who'd promised to support my dreams the way I'd supported his through law school he'd barely finished. "When did you stop loving me?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "I never stopped loving you, Winnie. You stopped loving me when you chose that firm over our family." "What family? We don't have children, Mark. It was just us." Brittany stood then, wrapping herself in my silk robe, the one Mark had given me for Christmas. "About that," she said, and her hand went to her stomach in a gesture that made my blood freeze. "I'm pregnant. 6 weeks along. We were going to tell you properly, but since you're here—" The room tilted. I gripped the doorframe to stay upright. Pregnant. My sister was pregnant with my husband's child. In my house, in my bed, wearing my lingerie. "We already told Mom and Dad," Brittany continued like she was discussing dinner plans. "This morning, actually. They understand. They think it's for the best. You'll be able to focus on your career without distractions, and Mark and I can start the family he's always wanted. You told our parents before telling me." My voice finally cracked, the first sign of emotion breaking through the strange calm. Mark stepped forward. "We wanted them to help mediate. To help you understand. This isn't about hurting you, Winnie. Sometimes people just grow apart. You grew toward your career, and I grew toward Brittany. Toward my sister. You grew toward my 28-year-old sister who lives in our guest room and doesn't even have a real job." Brittany's face hardened. "Not everyone measures success by salary, Winifred. Some of us measure it by happiness, by love, by the life growing inside us." I turned away from them, both, walked to my closet and started pulling clothes off, hangers. They watched in silence as I filled a suitcase, grabbing only essentials. My work clothes, my laptop bag, the jewelry box my grandmother had given me. I left the wedding china, the photo albums, the life we'd built together. As I zipped the suitcase, I turned back to them. "The house is in both our names, Mark. I'll expect a fair division of assets in the divorce." Mark actually looked relieved. "Of course. We can be civilized about this. I'll have my lawyer draw up papers. Something simple. Clean, like 4 months of deception was something you could wipe away with paperwork." I looked at Brittany one more time. She was already remaking my bed, pulling off the sheets they'd soiled, as if she was erasing me from my own life. "I have one stop to make at the office," I said. "Then I'll go to Mom and Dad's. I'm sure they're expecting me." Brittany paused in her sheet changing. "They just want what's best for everyone, Winnie. You'll see. This is better for all of us." I left without another word, rolling my suitcase past the wedding photos in the hallway, past the kitchen where I'd cooked 1,000 meals. Mark complained about missing past the living room, where they'd built their blanket forts while I built my career. I loaded my car and drove away from 8 years of marriage, 4 months of betrayal, and 28 years of sisterhood. But I didn't drive to my parents' house. Not yet. First, I had a document to sign. The Sterling & Associates building was mostly empty at 3 p.m. on a Thursday. The security guard Thomas, who'd watched me arrive at dawn and leave at midnight for 3 years, just nodded when he saw me. "Another late night, Miss Winifred?" he asked. "Something like that, Thomas. The latest night of my life." I went straight to Richard Sterling's office. He wasn't expecting me, but his door was always open for the associate handling his biggest case. He looked up from his own stack of documents, his reading glasses perched on his nose, and immediately knew something was wrong. "Winifred, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." I sat in the leather chair across from his desk where I'd first interviewed 7 years ago, where I'd presented countless case strategies, where I'd built my reputation as the firmest, most thorough attorney in the state. "Richard, I need to tell you something. It affects the Miller case." He leaned forward, concerned. "The patent discrepancy?" "No, that's solid. We'll win on that. This is about Mark, about a conflict of interest we need to discuss." I told him everything. The affair, the pregnancy, but more importantly, Mark's best friend Jake representing Donovan Corp. The conversations I'd overheard over the past months that I'd dismissed as paranoid. Mark's sudden interest in my case files. The questions he'd asked about the patent research that seemed supportive at the time. Richard's face grew darker with every word. He made notes on his legal pad, occasionally asking for clarification. When I mentioned that Brittany's art studio had recently received a large anonymous donation that allowed her to expand, he picked up his phone and called our investigator. By 5 p.m., we had enough preliminary information to see the outline of the conspiracy. Mark had been feeding information to Jake for 2 months. Not enough to win the case, but enough to complicate our strategy. Brittany's donation had come from a shell company linked to Donovan Corp. My parents, it turned out, had invested their entire retirement fund in Donovan stock 6 weeks ago. Richard looked at me over his glasses. "They played you Winifred. All of them. This wasn't just an affair. This was corporate espionage." I knew. Somehow sitting in that office where I'd spent more time than my own home, I'd known. "The partnership," he smiled, then grim but proud, "was approved by the board yesterday. I was going to tell you Monday. But given the circumstances, I think we should make it effective immediately, retroactive to last week before any of this came to light." He pushed a document across the desk, the partnership agreement I'd dreamed about since law school. My name was already there, right next to the other partners. The youngest partner in Sterling & Associates history. "There's a clause on page 7, Richard said, about intellectual property and work product. All your research on Miller remains yours. Mark can't claim any of it as marital property. Sign it, and everything you've built here is protected." I signed my name with the Mount Blanc pen my grandmother had given me for law school graduation, the pen Mark had mocked as pretentious. As I wrote my signature, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about protecting my assets. This was about claiming my worth. The drive to my parents' house took 20 minutes, but I used every second. I called our family attorney, not Uncle Thomas, who'd handled family matters for years, but Sharon Martinez, the best divorce lawyer in Connecticut. I emailed her the photos from the bedroom, the timeline I'd constructed, and Richard's preliminary findings about the corporate espionage. She responded within minutes. "Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. Come to my office tomorrow morning." My parents' house looked the same as always. A 2-story Tudor in the suburbs, with my mother's prized rose garden and my father's perfectly maintained lawn. The house where I'd won every academic award and Brittany had been crowned homecoming queen. Where my achievements were acknowledged, but her spirit was celebrated. They were waiting in the living room, positioned like they'd rehearsed this scene. Mom on the antique sofa she'd inherited from her mother, Dad, in his leather recliner, both wearing their disappointed parent faces. There was fresh coffee on the table, and my mother's homemade cookies like this was some kind of social visit. Winifred, Mom said, not even standing to greet me. "Sit down. We need to discuss this situation." I remained standing. "You mean the situation where my sister is sleeping with my husband and carrying his child?" My father shifted uncomfortably, but my mother's expression didn't change. "The situation where your marriage has failed because you prioritized career over family. where Mark, a good man who deserved better, found comfort with someone who could give him the attention he needed. Comfort. Is that what we're calling it? Don't be crude, Winifred. You always were too clinical about emotions. Brittany and Mark didn't plan this. Sometimes love simply happens. And frankly, we saw this coming. You saw this coming. You knew. My mother set down her coffee cup with the precise movement she'd taught me at etiquette classes. We knew you were neglecting your marriage. We knew Mark was lonely. When Brittany moved in and they started spending time together, we hoped it might wake you up. Make you realize what you were risking. Instead, you worked later. You missed more dinners. You abandoned your husband emotionally long before he found connection elsewhere. Connection. In my bed. In my lingerie. My father finally spoke. Winifred, please. This is difficult for everyone. But Brittany is pregnant. There's a child to consider now. We need to handle this as a family. As a family? What family? The one that conspired behind my back. The one that chose my sister's deception over my trust. My mother stood, then her full height making her imposing even at 63. You've always been dramatic about betrayal, Winifred. Life isn't a court case. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes people get hurt. But Brittany and Mark love each other. They want to build a life together. And we support them. And me. You have your career, your partnership track, your billable hours. That's what you chose, isn't it? So go have it. But don't stand in the way of their happiness. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be. My father pulled out a folder from beside his chair. Uncle Thomas drew up some preliminary divorce papers. Simple, straightforward. You keep your retirement accounts, Mark keeps the house. No alimony either way. Clean break. I looked at the papers without touching them, and if I don't sign, Mom's voice turned cold. Then you're not welcome here. Not at family dinners, not at holidays, not at the baby shower, or the christening, or any family event. You want to prioritize your career over family, fine. But you don't get to have both. I laughed then, surprising all of us. The sound was bitter but genuine. You're kicking me out of the family for being the victim of adultery. You're not a victim, Winifred. You're a workaholic who abandoned her marriage. Mark and Brittany are starting fresh. We won't let you destroy that with your vindictiveness. Vindictiveness. They thought wanting justice was vindictive. I looked around the room at the family photos on the mantel. Already I noticed recent pictures of me had been removed. Photos from Brittany's art shows, where I'd stood beside her, were gone. It was like they were already erasing me. There's something else, my father said quietly. Mother's will. She's considering some changes. Brittany will need support with the baby, and if you're choosing to go your own way. My grandmother, 93 years old, sharp as a tack, worth approximately $40 million from my grandfather's pharmaceutical patents. The inheritance my mother had held over both our heads for years. Of course they'd use that too. I understand, I said finally. I'll sign whatever you need, but I have some business to handle at the firm first. The Miller case needs to be transferred properly if I'm going to be dealing with personal matters. My mother relaxed slightly. We knew you'd be reasonable. You always were the practical one. Thomas can handle the divorce filing tomorrow. Keep it quiet, quick and clean. For everyone's sake. For everyone's sake. I walked to the door, then turned back. Tell Brittany she can have my grandmother's wedding dress. I know she always loved it. My mother actually smiled. That's very gracious of you, Winifred. Gracious. I was being gracious while they dismantled my life. I left my parents' house for what I thought would be the last time, drove to the Marriott downtown, and checked in under my maiden name. Then I called Sharon Martinez again. Sharon, I said when she answered, they want me to sign tomorrow. Let them think I will. But I need you to file some things first. By midnight, Sharon had filed an ethics complaint with the state bar against Mark for sharing privileged information. She'd reported the insider trading suspicions to the SEC. She'd initiated a forensic accounting of all marital assets. And she'd discovered something beautiful in Mark's arrogance. He'd been so confident I'd roll over that he'd already moved money to offshore accounts, traceable transfers that showed premeditation. I fell asleep in that hotel room alone, but not lonely, betrayed, but not broken. Tomorrow they thought I'd sign their papers and disappear into my career, while they played family with my life. Tomorrow they thought they'd won. They never did read documents carefully. That would be their downfall. The coffee shop was neutral ground, or so Mark claimed when he texted me the location. A Starbucks downtown, public enough that I wouldn't make a scene, private enough for business. He arrived 15 minutes early, I knew, because I'd been watching from my car. He kept checking his phone, adjusting his collar, the nervous gestures I once found endearing. Brittany came with him, of course. She was wearing one of my sweaters, the cashmere one from Nordstrom I'd bought for a client dinner. Her hand rested on her still flat stomach in that performative way newly pregnant women do. They sat side by side, united front against the woman they'd wronged. I entered exactly at 9 a.m., Sharon's advice echoing in my head. Be calm. Be cold. Be quick. I was wearing my best suit, the charcoal one that made me look like I owned the world. My hair was perfect. My makeup flawless. If this was my execution, I dressed for the occasion. Winnie Mark started standing halfway like he couldn't decide if this was social or professional. Thanks for coming. I sat without acknowledging either of them, pulling out my phone to record. For the lawyers, I said. I assume you don't mind. Brittany's face tightened. Always so formal, Winnie. This is family. No, I replied, looking directly at her. Family doesn't do this. Mark pulled out the divorce papers, the same ones my father had shown me. Uncle Thomas had been busy, everything typed up neat and official. Simple no-fault divorce, equal distribution of assets, no alimony claims. Clean as promised. I think this is more than fair, Mark said, pushing the papers toward me. You keep your retirement, your car, your personal belongings. I keep the house since Brittany and I need stability for the baby. We each walk away whole. Whole. He thought I'd walk away whole after he'd hollowed me out from the inside. I picked up the papers, pretending to read, though I'd already reviewed them with Sharon. She'd laughed when she saw them. Amateur hour, she'd called it. Uncle Thomas had missed dozens of elements that would make this void. There's no mention of the Miller case bonus, I noted. Mark shifted. That's your separate property. Earned after separation. We're not legally separated yet, Mark. You're still sleeping in my bed. Or is Brittany there now? Brittany leaned forward. Do you really want to be petty about money, Winnie? You make more in a month than most people see in a year. And Mark makes nothing since he was fired yesterday. The color drained from his face. What corporate espionage, Mark? Jake called you 37 times in the past 2 months. All during my work on the Miller case. Your firm found the connection concerning enough to terminate you immediately. That's impossible. You can't prove anything. I don't have to. Your firm's ethics board does. Jake already confessed when the FBI showed up at Donovan Corp yesterday. Apparently, the federal government takes corporate espionage seriously when billions are at stake. Brittany grabbed Mark's arm. What is she talking about? Your boyfriend was feeding information about my case to the opposition. The same opposition that's been funding your art studio. Did you think that donation was really anonymous? $40,000 just appearing right when you started sleeping with my husband. Mark stood up, his chair scraping loudly. You're trying to ruin me. No, Mark. You ruined yourself. I'm just signing papers. Speaking of which, I pulled out my pen, the same one I'd used to sign my partnership agreement, and signed the divorce papers with a flourish. But I signed them with my full name and new title, Winifred Matthews Sterling, Managing Partner. Mark snatched the papers, staring at the signature. Managing Partner. That's not official until January. Actually, it became official last week. Retroactive too, before I discovered your affair. Which means, according to Connecticut law, my partnership and all associated bonuses are separate property. But you'd know that if you'd passed the bar on your first try instead of your third. Brittany was staring at me with something like fear now. How much the Miller bonus? $15 million. My separate property, as Mark just confirmed. Though I'm sure the $40,000 from Donovan will help with baby expenses. Oh wait, that's being seized as evidence. You can't do this, Mark said, but his voice was weak. We had an agreement. We did. and I signed it. Just like you asked. Of course you might want to have a real lawyer look at it. Uncle Thomas tends to miss things. Like the fact that signing under duress or fraud voids contracts. Like the fact that commingling assets after adultery changes distribution. Like the fact that I have recordings of you admitting to the affair, the corporate espionage, and the conspiracy with my family. I stood gathering my things. My lawyer will be in touch about the house. Since you used it for adultery and potentially for discussing stolen corporate information, it's now a marital asset subject to full division. I'll take my half in cash. You have 30 days to buy me out or force a sale. Winnie, please, Brittany started, but I cut her off. The pregnancy was a nice touch. Very manipulative. But I had my doctor run my blood work from my last physical. You know what she found? Birth control hormones. The ones I've been taking religiously for 5 years. The ones you knew about because you borrowed them twice when you forgot your own. So unless Mark's super sperm can overcome pharmaceutical intervention, you might want to take a real test. I walked to the door, then turned back one last time. Oh, and Mom and Dad's investment in Donovan. The SEC froze those assets this morning. Turns out, insider trading runs in the family. They'll need a good lawyer. Unfortunately, Uncle Thomas was disbarred an hour ago. The last thing I saw was Mark slumping in his chair while Brittany frantically called our parents. The last thing I heard was her screaming that I'd ruined everything. The last thing I felt was free. 6 months passed like a fever dream. The federal investigation expanded beyond anything we'd imagined. Mark's emails revealed not just information sharing, but active sabotage of my work. He'd deleted research, changed filing deadlines in my calendar, even tried to access my password-protected files. Jake, desperate to save himself, provided evidence of a broader conspiracy involving 3 other cases I'd worked on. The trial was swift. Federal prosecutors don't play when billions in corporate fraud are involved. Mark got 5 years in federal prison, eligible for parole in 3. Jake got 7. 3 partners at Donovan Corp. got 10 to 15. The company itself folded under the weight of fines and lawsuits. My parents faced their own reckoning. The SEC found they'd been trading on inside information for 2 years using tips from Mark about my cases. Not enough to get rich, but enough to stay comfortable. They avoided prison through a plea deal, but lost everything. The house, the retirement funds, my mother's precious antiques. They moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Newark, the kind of place my mother used to call beneath us. Brittany's story unraveled publicly. The pregnancy was fake, a last manipulation to keep Mark when she sensed him pulling away. He'd been sleeping with 3 other women, including her best friend from art school. The studio donation was contingent on her relationship with Mark, and when that ended, so did her art career. She worked at a coffee shop now, the same Starbucks where we'd signed the divorce papers. But I didn't know any of this firsthand. I learned it from others, from the news, from Sharon, who kept me updated on legal proceedings. I was building something new, something better. The Miller case victory changed everything. $2 billion saved hundreds of jobs, protected, and my name on the winning brief. Richard Sterling made me managing partner of the new New York office. At 33, I was the youngest person to hold that position in the firm's 100-year history. My apartment overlooked Central Park. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist design, everything my mother would call cold, but I called peaceful. I could watch the sunrise over Manhattan while drinking coffee that no one else had made. I could work late without apologizing. I could exist without justifying my existence. The knock on my door on a Tuesday evening wasn't unexpected. Sharon had warned me Brittany had been trying to find my address. I opened it to find my sister looking nothing like the confident woman who'd stolen my husband. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes ill-fitting, her eyes hollow. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside without a word. She walked through my apartment, taking in the awards on the walls, the view, the obvious success. "You've done well," she said finally. I didn't respond. I'd learned that silence was sometimes the best response. "I need help, Winnie. I'm drowning. The coffee shop pays nothing. I can't afford rent. Mom and Dad can barely feed themselves. The family won't talk to us. Aunt Martha acts like we don't exist. Even grandmother changed her will before she died. Grandmother died 3 months ago. You didn't know? She left you everything, Winnie. Every penny. The letter said you were the only one with integrity. $40 million. I'd inherited $40 million and didn't even know my grandmother had passed. That's how thoroughly I'd been excised from the family. I lied about the pregnancy, Brittany continued. I was never pregnant. I just wanted Mark to choose me. But he didn't, not really. He was using me to hurt you, to get information, to feel powerful. I was just another piece in his game. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to know I'm sorry. Not the kind of sorry that asks for forgiveness. The kind that admits fault. I was jealous of you my whole life. You had direction, purpose, achievement. Everything I did felt small next to you. When Mark showed interest, I felt special for the first time. Chosen over the perfect sister. I wasn't perfect. No, but you were everything I couldn't be. Disciplined, focused, successful. And I hated you for it. Mom and Dad fed that hate, you know. Every time they praised my creativity, they were really saying you lacked it. Every time they called you cold, they were saying I was warm. We were tools they used against each other's insecurities. The truth of it sat between us, heavy and undeniable. Our parents had pitted us against each other from birth, creating a competition where there should have been companionship. I need money, Winnie. I'm not asking for forgiveness or family, just enough to start over somewhere else. Somewhere none of this happened. I walked to my desk, pulled out a checkbook. How much? $50,000, enough for a deposit somewhere, a car, some time to figure things out. I wrote the check for $75,000. Enough to actually start over, not just survive. But this is it, Brittany. This check is the end. You don't contact me again. You don't tell people we're sisters. You disappear from my life completely. She took the check with shaking hands. I understand. For what it's worth, you're going to be amazing. You already are. After she left, I stood at my window watching the city lights. Somewhere out there, Mark was in a federal prison cell. My parents were in their tiny apartment. Brittany would disappear into a new life, and I was here, successful beyond my dreams, but utterly alone. My phone rang. Emma Sterling Richards' daughter, who'd become my closest friend. Dinner at 8, she asked. That new place in Tribeca, I'll meet you there. I had built a new family. Not of blood, but of choice. Emma, who understood ambition without jealousy. Richard, who mentored without condescension. Sharon, who fought for me when my own family wouldn't. The junior associates I mentored, hungry for success but kind in their pursuit of it. 6 months later, I was speaking at Harvard Law School about integrity in corporate law. A young woman raised her hand. What do you do when success costs you everything, she asked. I thought about Mark in prison, my parents in poverty, Brittany in exile, my grandmother's fortune that felt like consolation for a family lost. You realize that everything isn't what you thought it was, I answered. Success didn't cost me my family. It revealed that I never really had one. The people who truly love you don't make you choose between achievement and affection. They don't punish your growth or weaponize your dreams. Real love multiplies joy, not divides it. The students were silent, absorbing this truth that law school wouldn't teach them. The signature that mattered most wasn't on my divorce papers or my partnership agreement, I continued. It was the one I signed on my own worth. The moment I decided I deserved better than people who would only love me if I made myself smaller. That signature changed everything. After the lecture, a man approached. Samuel Chen, he introduced himself. I teach pediatric surgery here. Your talk was inspiring. We talked for an hour about ambition and medicine, law and life. He didn't flinch when I mentioned my divorce, didn't judge when I explained my family's exile. He simply listened, then asked if I'd like to continue the conversation over dinner. That was a year ago. Now, Samuel and I live together in a brownstone in Boston. Not married, not yet, but building something real. He understood my late nights because he had his own. He celebrated my victories without feeling diminished. He met my chosen family and embraced them as his own. The call came on a Thursday like all the life-changing Thursdays. Sharon's voice was gentle. Your father had a heart attack, Winnie. He's stable, but barely. Your mother asked me to call you. They want to see you. I flew to Connecticut that afternoon. The hospital was the same one where I'd been born 35 years ago, where Brittany had arrived 4 years later, where our family had begun its slow dissolution. My parents looked small in the hospital bed and visitor's chair. My father, hooked to monitors, seemed to have aged a decade in 2 years. My mother, without her jewelry and designer clothes, looked like any worried wife in any hospital room. You came, my mother said, surprise evident. You're still my parents. Biology doesn't change even if everything else does. My father reached for my hand with his good one. I'm sorry, Winifred. For all of it. For choosing sides. For the money. For failing you as a father. I squeezed his hand. I know, Dad. We lost everything, my mother said quietly. But losing you was the worst part. Pride is a cold comfort when you're dying alone. You're not alone. I'm here. We talked for hours. Not about reconciliation or forgiveness, those would take longer if they came at all. But about small things. My work. Their health. The weather. Safe topics that didn't cut too deep. As I left, my mother called out, Winifred, that paper you signed. The partnership. It saved you, didn't it? It saved more than me, Mom. It saved the truth. The autumn light filtered through the windows of my office at Sterling & Associates' Boston branch. 3 years had passed since that Thursday when I discovered my husband with my sister. 3 years of rebuilding, restructuring, redefining what family meant to me. The Miller case had become a textbook study at law schools. The conspiracy, the conviction, the complete dismantling of a corrupt network that had infected 3 major corporations. My name was on every document, every brief, every victory. But more importantly, my work had protected thousands of jobs and preserved the integrity of the legal system I'd devoted my life to serving. Samuel proposed last month not with grand gestures or public displays, but quietly, privately, over breakfast in our kitchen. He'd said he didn't want to own me or complete me, but to complement me, to build something together while maintaining our individual strengths. I'd said yes, not because I needed marriage, but because I wanted this partnership. My parents attended the small ceremony. They'd earned back some trust through consistent therapy and genuine accountability. They'd never be the parents I'd needed as a child, but they were learning to be the parents I could accept as an adult. My father, walking with a cane now but walking nonetheless, had tears in his eyes when he saw me in my simple white dress. Brittany didn't come. She'd built a life in Oregon teaching art to elementary school children living quietly under a different name. She sent a card unsigned, but unmistakable in its handwriting. It said simply, "You deserved better. Be happy." Mark served 3 years of his 5-year sentence. Model prisoner, they said. He worked in the prison library helping other inmates with their appeals. I heard he found religion, though, which one depended on who was telling the story. He'd written me once a long rambling letter about redemption and forgiveness. I'd read it, then filed it away. Some chapters don't deserve reopening. The lesson I learned wasn't about revenge or justice, though both played their parts. It was about value. Not the kind measured in billable hours or bank accounts, though I had plenty of both now, but the kind measured in integrity and refusing to shrink yourself for people who claim to love you, in signing your name to your own worth and standing by that signature. My grandmother's money funded a scholarship program for first-generation law students. Women who, like me, were told they were too ambitious, too cold, too much. The program didn't just pay tuition. It provided mentorship, showing them that success and warmth weren't mutually exclusive, that ambition and family could coexist with the right people. Richard Sterling retired last year, making me the youngest senior managing partner in the firm's history at 36. In his farewell speech, he said something that stayed with me. Winifred came to us as a brilliant attorney, but she became a partner the day she signed her own worth into existence. That signature, that moment of claiming her value despite every attempt to diminish it, that's what leadership looks like. Emma threw me a celebration party, small and intimate, just our chosen family. Sharon brought champagne that cost more than my first car. Samuel made his grandmother's dumplings. My parents sent flowers with a note that read, "We're proud of who you've become, not in spite of what happened, but because you survived it." Survival. That word felt too small for what had happened. I hadn't just survived, I'd transformed. The woman who'd walked into her bedroom that Thursday afternoon might have recognized the successful attorney I'd become, but she wouldn't recognize the person. The one who knew that love shouldn't require sacrifice of self. That family shouldn't demand you choose between affection and achievement. That signing your name to your own value was the most important document you'd ever execute. The young associates I mentored often asked how I'd managed it, how I'd walked away from everything I'd known and built something better. I told them the truth. The signature they thought mattered, the partnership agreement that protected my assets and secured my future, that was just paperwork. The real signature was invisible, written in the choices I made every day after. To value myself when others wouldn't. To build family from friendship rather than blood. To refuse to shrink so others could feel tall. That Thursday, when I'd discovered my husband with my sister, I'd thought my life was ending. In a way it was. The life built on seeking approval, on making myself smaller to fit their comfort, on believing that family meant accepting betrayal with grace. That life did end. But what rose from those ashes was worth the burning. A life where success didn't require apology, where love meant multiplication, not division, where the signature that mattered most wasn't on any legal document, but on the decision to never again accept less than I deserved. The paper they never read twice wasn't the divorce decree or the partnership agreement. It was the story I was writing with my life, the one where the betrayed sister didn't crumble or seek revenge, but simply claimed her worth and walked forward. The one where success was the best response, not because it hurt them, but because it healed me. Sometimes I thought about that other life. The one where I'd never worked late, never pursued partnership, never given Mark a reason to stray. Where Brittany and I remained sisters, where my parents remained proud, where Sunday dinners continued with their subtle cruelties disguised as concern. That life might have been easier, but it would have been a lie. The truth was harder, but cleaner. Like the partnership agreement I'd signed that day, every line mattered. Every clause had meaning. Every signature was binding. And I'd rather live an honest life alone than a false one, surrounded by people who only loved me when I was less than I could be. The young woman who'd asked me about success costing everything had emailed me last week. She'd made partner at her firm. She'd also lost her engagement when her fiancé couldn't handle her promotion. But she was grateful, she wrote. Grateful for learning early that real love celebrates your victories instead of feeling threatened by them. I wrote back with the truth no one had told me at her age. The cost of success isn't what you lose, it's what you refuse to accept. Every signature you make, literal or metaphorical, is a declaration of worth. Sign wisely, sign boldly, and never let anyone convince you to sign yourself smaller. As the sun set over Boston, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, I signed one more document. A letter to my future children, the ones Samuel and I would raise together. It said, "Dear ones, you will grow up in a world that tells you to choose. Between success and family, between ambition and love, between achievement and affection. This is a false choice. The people who truly love you will never make you choose. They will celebrate your victories, comfort your defeats, and stand beside you as you sign your name to whatever dreams you chase. Love multiplies. It never divides. If someone asks you to be less so they can feel like more, that's not love. That's fear. And you, my dear ones, were born to be fearless. I sealed the letter to be opened when they were old enough to understand. When they faced their own choices between shrinking and growing. When they had to decide whose approval mattered most. The signature at the bottom was simple. Just my name. Winifred Matthews Sterling Chen. Every part of who I'd become. The daughter who'd survived betrayal. The woman who'd claimed her worth. The wife who'd found real partnership. The success story written not in spite of loss, but because of what I'd refused to lose myself. That signature, the one on a letter my children wouldn't read for years, that was the one that mattered most. Because it proved that after everything, all the betrayals and battles, the conspiracies and courtrooms, I could still sign my name with pride. Still claim every part of my story. Still choose growth over grievance. The paper they never read twice was my life itself. They'd skimmed the surface, seeing only what they wanted, missing the fine print where my value was written. But I'd read every word, understood every clause, and signed my name to all of it. In the end, that's all any of us can do. Sign our names to our own worth and refuse to let anyone convince us to accept less. The signature that changes everything isn't on any document. It's in the decision to value yourself when no one else will. To build your life on your terms. To write your story in permanent ink, knowing that erasure was never an option. The Thursday that changed everything wasn't the day I found them in my bed. It was the day I signed my own value into existence. And that signature, invisible though it may be, was binding. Forever. What would you do if your entire family betrayed you for choosing success over submission? How would you rebuild when everyone you loved chose your betrayer over you? Share your thoughts below, and if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. Remember that your worth isn't determined by who stays, but by who you become when they leave. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and may you always have the courage to sign your name to your own value.